Well, that was my dish. I was a correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. The university was rather diffident and had a wary eye on what Professor Trueblood was doing. They weren't entirely proud of it, but although he was, he instructed the correspondents, there were 2 of us in the class, that he didn't want any publicity on this. Well, I'd been grown up in a family of journalists, and the public has the right to be informed. So as soon as that first class was over, I ran. I was a candidate for the cross-country team anyway. I ran the 1.5 miles down to the telegraph office and immediately filed a query on it.
Would you say that this was approximately at the time when you and the University of Michigan parted company?
Well, soon after that. It was after the paragraphers throughout the country took it up. After McCutcheon made a cartoon in which they took liberties with Professor Trueblood's name, called him Professor Foxy Truesport. Many of these clippings were commendatory, but most of them were, well, had entertainment values, shall we say. And so that I was invited to go elsewhere, and I was found that word of my radical ideas, shall we say, or my agitations to change the processes of education, make them a little bit more democratic and more in line with what the students, who were outnumbered the faculties, would like to have. In spite of the popularity of some of my ideas with the students, I found that I wasn't popular as a student, and I was turned down by 8 other colleges.
Oh, I see. And did you at any time go back to school thereafter, Mr. Handy?
No, I didn't. I went for 2 weeks to the University of Pennsylvania. I was a native of the state of Pennsylvania, and they received me. But after the 2 weeks, being put under pressure from, they asked me if I'd like to leave, and told me that gentlemen didn't stay where they weren't wanted, and succeeded in making me miserable enough to communicate it to the Chicago Tribune. Medill McCormick, who was then publisher of the Chicago Tribune, said, "Come back here and I'll give you as good an education as you could get in any university."
And this is precisely what you continued to do for a number of years. I was most interested in hearing of a story of an editorial, I believe, that you wrote when you were 19 years old on the subject of education, which found its way into the Chicago Tribune. Does this ring a bell?
Yes, the chief editorial writer was on his vacation, and Bill Hard, now on the staff of Reader's Digest, was in charge in his absence. I'd been making a little extra money by writing some editorials on the side, and I wrote one questioning the Chicago policies, that is, the policies of the Board of Education, in that they didn't have enough pictures in the textbooks, and said that they were already abreast in some classes with John Comenius, who 400 years before had put the first illustration in a textbook, and that maybe in 400 years we should have learned to put 2 or more into a textbook.
Well,
from that standpoint,
some progress, I think you'd agree, at least has been made in the years that have followed.
Oh, indeed, yes. But the Board of Education didn't like that, and they didn't like it any the better when they found that a 19-year-old boy had written this editorial.
Was that the end?
So they wanted me expelled, but Medill McCormick appealed to their sympathy and explained that it was done while the chief editorial writer was on his vacation. I was allowed to stay in my new school.
Mr. McCormick, Medill that is, who later became the United States Senator, was a man with whom you must have had a very close personal relationship.
Well, I did. Going and coming, I was under instructions to ask for a new job every time I felt I knew the one I'd been given on. That was part of this. Of course, I speeded that up, and in the vacation season, I'd have, 8 jobs during 16 weeks, and I always thought I'd learned them in 2 weeks. Maybe you were young once and know what young people are like.
Yes, I remember vaguely.
I had exaggerated ideas, so I was always ready for a new job.
Mr. Handy, I'd like to bring something up now, which I think is coming close to what later became the development and the establishment of the Jam Handy organization, and your conviction of the power of speaking with the eye, so to speak. Someone told me that the display advertising in the paper was not getting all the results it might have for the merchants, and that you decided to look into this, and I'd like to know what you found out.
Well, we had half the circulation of the Daily News. And it was difficult to keep the advertisers in the daily paper, partly because their ads in the news were read because the news carried more of them, and partly because the circulation was half the news. All those circulations weren't public information in those days, not public even to the people who bought those circulations. We tried a number of ways to make that advertising paid. We hired copywriters, we used illustrations, we provided services of various kinds, and the improvements were slight. It occurred to me finally, at that time I was assistant advertising manager in charge of retail, that if the salespeople knew more about what was being offered in the ads, that possibly they might be more enthusiastic and more informative when they were asked questions. So I went around to buyers and found out what's good about this merchandise. Why is it worth what's asked? Is it anything about it that's superior to other merchandise? And then I got permission to carry that information to the salespeople. It wasn't long before this secret weapon, the Daily News didn't know what we were doing, was working, because this enthusiasm and this information on the part of the salespeople put us in a position where we could sell the same merchandise, similar merchandise at the same prices, dollar for dollar for the Daily News, even though we had only half the circulation.